still. They're so filled with small holes, but still can't make me whole. I don't wanna wait to learn how to flow. I don't wanna wait, let's go out in this mode. Finally see gravity's grand slam, a place that I can know who the hell I am. I don't wanna wait to learn how to float. I don't wanna wait, let's go out in this boat. I don't wanna wait to learn how to float. I don't wanna wait, let's go out in this.
Welcome to Perspectives on Neurodiversity, a podcast dedicated to challenging myths and assumptions about neurodiverse life. I am your host, Christopher Scott Wyatt, speaking as the autistic me. Joining us for this episode is a guest we had previously, Surj. Surj is a musician. He considers himself a storyteller. His songs engage audiences everywhere by converting the magic around him into anthems we can all sing. I do want to say we had him last on as part of a band. He is part of Space Between Us, and we talked about How Are You Really? How Are You Really, Surj? That is doing really well.
Yeah, it's kind of a whirlwind, actually. I think whenever I listen to it, or whenever it comes on, it's really, really happy. And it was such a groundbreaking moment. And I think it was a really big step. And I think everything after that has just been really fun and amazing, really. So every day I become more and more thankful that I was able to be a part of that.
I mentioned to you when we talked in the last episode, the Paris in Spring track was one that my daughters and I listened to, and that's one that's doing very well on the streaming services.
That video is haunting me. No, but it's a great song. And I was actually... The cool story about that was I was in a Monoprix, which is like a supermarket in Paris, and they play it continuously, and so that's really, really nice. And it's really nice to have a song, I guess, that means so much to so many different people. So yeah, thank you. It was a really great song to be a part of.
Before we move on to talk about your solo project, what's going on with Matthew, Sunil, and Josh now that this is done? Did you guys do a tour? What did you guys do after it took off?
We're kind of still. So Josh just had a baby, which I think might have been the case last time, or they're in the middle of having a baby. Josh's doing his thing, and so Sunil was playing with us last weekend, so we did our first show last weekend in 3 years as Surj. So that was really, really cool. Matthew's back in the States, so we've kept in touch, and the three of them are really, really well. We talk from now and again, but again, I think we've always said that after the last project that we would take a bit of a break. So hopefully at some point we'll do something. You'll never know.
You did not take much of a break. You went straight from Space Between Us doing their project, How Are You Really?, to doing a solo project, The Light Between the Oceans. You didn't pause. Why is that?
I think maybe from the outside, it seemed like I didn't pause. I mean, How Are You Really? We finished writing that. I mean, it was finished writing. It was kind of, then we had to go through the whole year process of putting it out, marketing, music videos, stuff like that. So it might seem really quickly because the two have come out closer together. Honestly, there was a big break where I probably didn't write a song for about 7 or 8 months. But for me, that's a really, really long time. So it probably seems like a short time for you guys. For me, it felt like ages, but something just clicked. Something just clicked really quickly. And I'm probably more surprised than anyone else that I'm sitting here in this position with new music, but it's really fun. And I've always said if the music's good enough and I think it's listen worthy, then we should put it out. So it's really nice. It's a nice surprise to be here.
You talked about the challenges of being an autistic individual and musician when we first met. You had talked about how COVID had changed things and it had allowed you to sort of be isolated with a pot of friends and family. But you just said you did a live show.
Yeah.
So what was it like getting back into live performance and getting into those routines?
It was so weird. It was so weird. And so like last weekend we played with the Royal Academy Orchestra. Ian has been trying to get us to do, so obviously Space Students haven't played, and I think it came about a time that I did something that was live and in front of people. So we did this performance, and obviously the new record is very orchestral. We had friends at the Royal Academy of Music who came and played, and we played a show, and it was great. It was really weird. It honestly felt like a bit like sound checking and rehearsing, and it was a really weird day. And then just coming out on stage after the first song, it felt like you hadn't been away at all. But coming out, and then there was actually people there, and like we had such a great attendance for that. And I was surprised. I was surprised that people wanted to still come out and see us. It was so nice. And if anything, it just gives me another buzz, and it kind of. I think the winner was music that night, and it's so powerful, and it just hits across all boundaries. So it was really, really nice to be back out there again.
The blurb from The Light Between the Oceans that says, "The light between the oceans is an anthem of hope for uncertain times. So many of us are walking around with more than we can carry. Being our adult selves can be so different from what we thought our adult selves would be like." We talked about coming to terms with being autistic and neurodiverse and how those challenges had faced and how where you thought you were going isn't where you ended up. Let's revisit some of that. You were a classically trained musician, and you ended up a studio musician at a very young age.
Yeah.
How old were you when you began your studio musician career?
I did the audition when I was 14. So I went out to LA when I was 15. So it was probably around 14, 15. Is when I first flew over to the States for them. That was basically that first night in California was my first paid gig in the Walt Disney Concert Hall. So, which is really funny to think. But yeah, it was a good moment.
At that time, where did you think you were going as a musician?
I had no idea. It was really stupid. I remember the week before I went to the States, I haven't spoken about this too much. I didn't realize how big it was. I didn't realize that Disney Channel was so big. And I was at my aunt's house the weekend before just watching. And it began to hit me on the flight on the way over and stuff like that, like how big it was. So in a way, it was like it was an amazing thing to be a part of. But at the same time, I think there was so much to take in. And I think I've only realized the last couple of years what kind of effect that had on me. Because I was like, I'm just a guitar player, I'm just a songwriter. I didn't know I could sing at the time. I didn't know I wanted to be in a band. I didn't even think about albums, stuff like that. I was just happy to be there. There were good moments, but there was also it was so intimidating. And obviously you do that for the summer, then you go back home and you're at school for 6 months, and then you go and do that again. It's really confusing. And because I went on my own as well, because we're part of a big family, so I had a representative obviously until I became of age. And so it was pretty isolating in a weird way. I loved it, and I wouldn't change it, but it was really intense at the same time.
And at that time, the world didn't know you were autistic. Did you know you were autistic? Or did you just know something was a little different?
I think my parents were trying to get me diagnosed at the time, but I think like any teenager, I think I was in denial about it. I worked it out pretty early on. I think I might have mentioned this last time, but like my dad had left out by accident, like it had left like the signs of what it means to have that. I very quickly, every point was like, oh crap, this is me. And I think I didn't want to be labeled that early on. And I think it was hard enough going to high school, secondary school, and then having this other label put on you. Like I just really wanted to avoid that as much as possible. So for me, I was in denial about it till I was 20. And in a way, I tried to suppress it, which just made it so much harder. Because I was trying to push down a suitcase that had way too much in it.
How did you cope with your autistic traits then at such a young age, even resisting the label, identifying as autistic, but having those traits, routine, wanting to, control some of your environment? How did you manage that from such a young age, being a professional musician?
I think music was just the biggest cover up. I think I could obsess over something that was normal. I know a lot of people have like autistic traits, and they have obsessive behavior and things that maybe are not considered normal. I mean, it's not right, and I disagree. I disagree with that. I think all passions should be judged the same, but I guess because music is such a big part of everyone's lives, people just thought I was mad about music. And I think because I was put into an adult's world, and I think one thing about autism is like you struggle with people your own age, right? So I was kind of put into another world where I felt comfortable, because I felt I didn't never, even sometimes today, I feel more comfortable with someone who's of an older generation, of a younger generation. And I kind of just put myself in those situations. But, there was a lot of loneliness and there was a lot of brokenness there, because, I'm trying to get through life doing one thing, but, I at the same time, like, I'm trying to cover up. And I remember I would overanalyze everything in my head, even the way I would have a conversation with someone or the way I would text someone, everything would be overanalyzed. And I think that caught up with me eventually, but it was really tough.
You mentioned the obsession with music. People sort of say, oh, well, it's music. All musicians are obsessed with music, as where if you had been obsessed with role-playing games or football, tracking all the stats in the Premier League or whatever, people would notice, oh, that's different. But because your obsession was music,
yeah,
it allowed you to mask.
Definitely. And like I have obsession with stats and stuff like that, like particular other interests that I have. Like I think music was just the most ultimate cover-up. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, I love music. I wouldn't change that for the world. But at the same time, I feel like maybe I would have developed quicker if I had, like an obsessiveness about, football facts or stuff like that.
You are playing guitar, but you were classically trained on piano, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I had it for 3 years. Yeah.
And how did you find the guitar was your instrument of choice?
It just speaks to me more. So actually on this record, there's a lot more piano playing, but I think I'm going through a little bit of a phase at the moment. I think it's just such a sexier instrument in a way. And it just spoke to me so much more. And when it came to writing, I just found it a lot easier to get what I wanted across. I think with piano, there's a theory to it, which a non-musical person can understand. Whereas I generally think like with guitar, it's an art in terms of like what we play doesn't necessarily make sense to the out, and you've got to like mold your mind in a totally different way to be able to do that. Like I think you can teach someone decently enough piano, but I think guitar is like you're either good or you're not, which is harsh for some budding guitar players out there. It's a great instrument, and it's so much more portable. And who wants to carry around a piano anyway? That's a horrible instrument to carry around.
If I might ask, how many instruments do you play?
I play guitar, piano, bass. So those are the 3 main ones. But I think with producing and stuff, I understand the way music works. So if I do string stuff, I can play it. I can basically play anything I really want into the computer. Most things I can play into the computer. It's really rare that I have to get someone in and play something. So guitar and piano are probably my 2 main instruments, as well as voice. You
had been speaking another language before we connected today. If I might ask, what languages do you speak?
English is my second language. So my mum speaks Punjabi. So like my mum's from India. So I've been talking to India press today all day. So today's like my press day. So if I'm really tired, I still have moments where I don't think in English. I have weird moments where I can't remember words. So I only learned English when I was like 8 or 9. So
I was wondering, because you had gone to and from France as well.
Yeah.
You've been doing some stuff in Europe. So do you also speak any French or German?
My French is okay. I like it. It's probably got worse since I've been in Paris, but I know enough to like get around. My friend Lily, who does Paris in Spring, thinks my accent's awful, so she hates it when I try and speak French. But I think I'm not too bad. I think I got better living in Paris. But I try and speak to English. So English is my easiest favorite to speak.
I was curious because, there's a myth of the savant, the autistic savant. So I was curious when you spoke, you said you spoke other languages. I was just curious how many are going through your mind at once.
Yeah, no, it's weird. I mean, even when my mum will talk to me in Punjabi, but I'll talk back in English. So I'm getting really, really lazy with it. Like for example, if I had children, I don't think I'd get my children to learn. It was just something that was instilled in me. I don't remember learning it either. I think if you tried to teach me from zero, I'd probably be useless. So it's just something in that armor, I guess.
The solo project that you're now doing, the Light Between the Oceans, you talk about the adulthood being different than you expected. You also talk about this being an optimistic work.
Yeah. Do you know, a lot of people think it's a lot sadder than it is. I just enjoyed making it. I think How Are You really had a very like strong, powerful message, whereas I think this is lots of different stories. But in a way, all those stories are really personal to me after a really big event that happened to me last year. And then I think from out of that moment, I wrote these 11 tracks. I guess after having the big How Are You Really moment, I guess I am being a lot more positive about things. And, I kind of just wanted to put that on record. And I think it's so easy to think that we have a happy ending and then we just ride off into the sunset. I was thinking about it the other day, actually. It's like, how many like romantic movies do you watch? And they drive off into the sunset at the end, but then, they have tax problems or their financial problems or their kids give them issues or, and like, they've got to deal with everyday life. But I think it's like having joy in everyday life and having joy, just because I've written this album, which is, kind of broken out and I've actually been truthful on a record doesn't mean like life has got any easier. I just think I'm beginning to see the joy more and I'm a lot more comfortable with myself. So like, obviously with How Are You Really, that was really emotional and draining to put that out because that was so personal, whereas like The Light Between the Ocean was like, I can do this and I can write this personal stuff. It's okay, So I think How Are You Really is like a big more of a statement album, but I actually think this one works a lot better as a collective almost. But yeah, I think it's really optimistic and I think it just shows where I am in my life. It's really the story of the last year. I think How Are You Really was the story of like 4 years, whereas I think this has just been the story of the last 12 months. And I'm really happy to snapshot it in a really cool. I'm really, I'm fond of everything we do, but I'm really particularly fond of this one. I do have a little smile on my face when this comes on because I'm really fond of this.
How Are You Really it's a mental health question.
Yeah.
How are you really?
Yeah.
As where Light, well, that's optimistic. In some ways, there's a spiritualness to the collection. Can you comment on how you moved from the asking yourself and others, how are you? Especially during COVID, we had the pandemic, there was some stress and, we all went through some stress and some dark times.
Yeah.
Now you're doing this and there's sort of the spirituality where you even say, you sort of pray that this gives hope.
Yeah.
When you listen to your own work, what's coming through? What's that spiritualness?
I think someone who's like content with themselves and someone who I don't necessarily know where I'm going, but I have hope in the journey, and I think sometimes so much we can like look for moments or try and build up to a perfect moment and like try and tick stuff. If I only had this would make me happy, or if I had that, it would make me happy. But I think so we look so hard for stuff that sometimes we actually miss what we're in. And what I'm trying to say is like what we're in is quite beautiful. And what the moments that we have right now are precious. And my encouragement to people is just to take a step back and look at what we have and be grateful. Be thankful for that. Maybe I'm in a bit more reflective mood than normal the last couple weeks. But I just think it's really important to hit pause sometimes. And I think as humans, we're very bad at as society. I think we're very bad at hitting pause. So I think this is what this is doing. It's just saying, hey, like even when there doesn't seem like hope, that there is hope. That there is light. Between the chaos. And
you mentioned that you record the instruments. So you recorded yourself playing the piano and the guitar on this?
Yeah, I did. It's a really different record in terms of like, I probably did like 90%. So I had Eric and Francis come in to do string stuff, which I just can't do. But a lot, what I did love about it is like, most of it is actually just me, which is really, really nice.
And what was that process like? How did you go about that?
So, for example, the first song, the boat, obviously I had that piano thing and I had that I just had that for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then, so it's kind of like the main riff or the main thought I try and put into Logic. And then after that, I kind of just build. I always work very structurally in terms of I like to do drums, bass, guitars, strings, I always do vocals last. But then I think what I did with this record is I tried to push the boundaries of everything. For the last way through this albums, like the snare sounds are really similar, and like stuff like the overheads are really similar. Whereas for this one, I really tried to push the boundaries of what I'm doing. But yeah, basically just building it up. And I think what I was really big on this album was to create an atmosphere. Well, so like every track has its own atmosphere, so I don't just want to hear something that's like completely in stereo, but actually like I want to feel like these songs are actually happening in another dimension. So I spend a lot of time, so for example, something like Couvert Vera, I went out in Paris and stuck a microphone in a cafe and had that kind of ambience, really creating spaces and put music on top of that, which was really nice.
This is an 11-track album. It's available on most streaming services. The track I'm looking at, the one that caught me, and the reason I asked about the spirituality, you have a track, the third track, called Glory Be.
Yeah.
It's a 6.5 minute track.
Yeah, it never finishes. That was really funny. I just kept adding bits to it at the end, and it never, like, it was way too long in the end. So,
well, what is the story behind that track? It's captivating.
Yeah, it's from one of my favorite books is The Magician's Nephew, one of my favorite chapters of all time. So it's the Chronicles of Narnia, and it's when Aslan creates Narnia, and that's basically, it tells that story. And there's a great line in Silverchair, a book, I think, no, Silverchair is the book before Jill is looking at Aslan, and Aslan has this incredible line that says, you wouldn't have called me unless if I called you first. So often, that just really caught me. I actually got that framed on my bedroom wall because that made me really emotional. I was like, actually, there's a place that's already calling us. It's whether we decide whether we're going to call ourselves, and I think, and that whole idea of creation and evolution and stuff like that, and it's very much like a dream, that track. And yeah, I'm really fond of that one, and it's one of my favorite books. And I think what the cool thing about this record is, like, every track is kind of like a little passion of mine. It's like if it's a TV show or it's a thought or it's a poem, every track there, really has a basis in something that I'm really passionate or something that's really struck me in the last 12 months.
Well, I admit, I listen to my music through Apple. I'm looking at The Light Between the Oceans on my MacBook Pro. I've got my Beats headphones to get the full effect. It's a lossless album, which is nice. I like the high quality audio. We talked about this previously. I really appreciate dedication to production.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned that you enjoy the editing process and the fine-tuning of your track. This is an amazingly well-done project. You're just sitting there with a computer and you're fine-tuning it. So can you talk about the joy that you find in that editing process?
I think what was really nice about this one is, like, I didn't have any pressures to do it. I think how are you really? You're dependent on 3 other people, and 3 other people are dependent on you. But I did this on lunch breaks and stuff like that, and like there's so many backing vocals on this, but I just did it in bits, and I did it for, like, so when friends were cooking, so when I had friends over for dinner, like, friends would be making dinner and I'm gonna go off and do 20 minutes of backing vocals, and I really did this in bits, and it just happened really organically, and the editing process was just really, really fun. It was just pushing, and what's a bit weird for me is that I really did try different versions of stuff. So there's about 6 different versions of The Boat, or there's like several different versions of, like, Glory Be was originally going to be a completely different song. The song was the same if you just heard it on guitar, but the structure would have been a lot different. But actually just having that whole, like, intro and that kind of non-sustained piano and stuff like that, that really just came out of, like, working stuff out and listening to stuff. And I've gone to a lot of recitals over the last 12 months, and which is kind of a new passion of mine, going out to see classical music live and just seeing what's going on and seeing what people are doing with synths and stuff like that. I'm really just listening to different music and not being scared of, like, not doing the normal editing. The editing's just been a really, really fun process. This would be the funnest one, I would say. And I think just finding stuff that works and stuff that sounds good. And I think ear fatigue is a big thing for a lot of people. And just having 20 minutes, doing stuff in 20 minutes is really fun. So I was just like, some days I wake up and just like, I'm going to really work on some bass parts today, and and strings and stuff like that. Just kind of building it up into a level where you're happy with it.
I'm curious, do you keep the previous versions as you work towards a final? Do you keep the different styles?
They are in a folder somewhere, but I'm really reluctant because I don't know if I'd ever put those out. I have so many demos, but I think they're demos for a reason, and it's just not like my best. Maybe one day. I think hearing the demo versions of these would be interesting, but I think I'm always, when I'm in a process, I'm always trying to take it to I know when it's done. So so one thing I always do at the end of the project is I'll bounce the whole project. And one thing I do, it's a bit different because I live here now in North London, but what I used to do is I used to get the train from a station to Waterloo and just have it sitting on a train with overheads and play it through all the way through, and I'd make notes in my notebook and then go and change stuff. So there does come a point where I do bounce stuff out, and then I listen to it as a collective, and then I go back in and edit. So that happens with every record. Yeah, maybe one day I'll put those out. It really depends on if it's worthy or not.
When we last talked, we discussed the order in which songs are arranged on an album. The album experience still remains important to me. I know that there are people like, oh no, I'm going to remix it and make my own, just hit shuffle. But we talked about the intentionality. You organized this, The Light Between the Oceans. It starts with the boat. Well, that makes sense. We're talking about oceans and we start with a boat. How did you organize this album, and what was your thought process as you put the tracks in a 1 through 11?
Well, the boat was actually the easiest one because the boat was the first song I wrote. So the boat I was in our church's vestibule, and there's an upright piano in there, which I wrote 90% of the record. That was easy. I'd been to a show a couple of days previous, which was a really big moment for me. I went to see it. My friend took me to a show as a birthday present, and she took me to the most incredible thing. And I was kind of just like almost. There was a weird couple of days. I just felt like I had to write. I was so moved by what I saw and what I heard. I had to do something. And so the boat was one of the first things I wrote. I think in terms of intentionality of the track listing, this is probably the most I've thought about it. And it really does go from the boat to Oakworth, and it does take you on a journey. It's almost around the world. It kind of like drops off in Paris and in the middle, and it really sums up the last year. So in terms of, I think How Are You really is great, and there's great songs on there. But I think as an album, I think this goes through a lot better, and it's a lot smoother, and I think there's a lot more thought behind it. And I could give you so many details, which would probably bore the listeners, but there has been a real process to this.
Now, what's your process for promoting? You're doing podcasts. Are you going to do some music videos, or have you shot music videos for any of these?
No music videos. I was considering it, but I think this is sound a bit arrogant of me, but I think the album is so beautiful. I think it'd be wrong to. One of the best compliments I received on this was from a friend, and she said it's a piece of art. I'm not saying it's a piece of art. She's very, very gracious, but at the same time, I think the songs are so big and so atmospheric. I think it'd be wrong to try and put images on them. I was briefly considering putting Seagulls out as a single, because that's probably, out of all of them, that's probably the most single worthy one. But I decided just to put it out, and in a way, that's how I like it. There's no singles. There's no. I wasn't under any pressure by the label to do any market. I said, I'm just going to put it on Instagram and say, look, I've got this out, go and listen to it. And people just loved it. And that's my ideal way of like releasing music. And I guess now I'm kind of doing it the opposite way. I'm doing the promotion afterwards because it is doing well. I thought, oh crap, I better talk to some people about it. And I love the fact it's out there as an album. I was very, you'll probably enjoy this, but I was very close to not having it as separate tracks. I wanted to just have it as 60 minutes. But iTunes, you have to have the separate. You can't do a 60-minute track on iTunes. Otherwise, if I had the freedom, I'd really would just want to put it out as that. like without the individual tracks because they all lead on into each other. I guess promotion, playing a show last week was a really big deal, and I think sitting here, I'd like to play some more shows now, and just really, it's weird. I think I found my sound, which is really nice. I think that's a big thing about this record as well. I think I finally found a sound that I could do a couple of projects like this now. So yeah, it's been really good.
Did I hear you correctly? You said you wrote a lot of this at a piano in your church?
Yeah, it was so we've our entry to our church, we've got it's called a vestibule, which is before you come to like the main sanctuary, and there's this beaten up upright piano in there, and so I live above our church, so which is great, so I can pop in anytime and just write songs, and they've got a really beaten up piano, but it's got a particular sound that I like about it. Yeah, so there was just some nights at 1 o'clock in the morning, and because I've been to this show that my friend took me to, I was like, I think my New Year's resolution was to become a better piano player last year, but then I got taken to this show and I was just kind of really inspired, and I just want to do something a bit more classical, something a bit more like thought behind it, and not just trying to break into a singles market. And yeah, so there was some special moments writing songs in there.
You thought of Seagulls as a single. Why that track?
The most shortest one. Seagulls was probably probably more fun. Seagulls out of all of them is probably a more conventional track, whereas like something like, I don't think you could market like Normal People as a single, even though Normal People is one of my favorite songs. I think Seagulls is probably one that you could play on the radio and people would like it, and I think when they have been playing on the radio, that's the one they've been playing. But again, I didn't want people to hear Seagulls and associate that with the album, because like Seagulls is kind of like the odd one out in the album. It's very much like Seagulls and Engines are probably the two singles. But again, I just wanted people to go and listen to the album. When I was texting my friends, I said, please listen to it, track 1 to track 11. And somebody listened to one track, and so one of my friends listened to like one song and he said, oh, this is okay. But they listened to it 1 to 11. It was like, this makes so much more sense in this context.
Out of curiosity, you have done 2 albums that are solo projects.
Yeah.
And do you wrap those around the time that you're spending with Space Between Us, or how does that work? Lots of bands members do solo projects, but how are you spacing your solo versus your group projects? And then you also do work for other performers. So how do you balance all of this?
I think it's just what we think is the next project. What I feel. I mean, obviously, Space Between Us is in a weird spot right now, obviously, because we are all in very different places. And again, I was happy to wait to see if we did something else and to see if we are going to do something else. I think my rule is, if the music's good, then I'll be there. I think if the music wasn't good, I wouldn't bother putting it out. But I think if I feel like I have something to say and I have something to share, that's what I base on what I do and what I do next. I'm kind of making that decision over the next couple of weeks on what I'm going to do next. But I think I'd like to do a few more collaborations now. Doing an album is a really big commitment. The last one didn't feel like a commitment because it was so casual, and if they were all like that, then I might be a bit more persuaded to do a couple more. But I kind of become so flexible with that stuff. You know, it's really hard to plan that far ahead these days. Your
previous solo project, The Roads We Traveled,
yeah,
different style entirely.
It's my country album.
What is someone currently living in London doing, making a country album?
I went to Nashville on a student trip when I was at UCL. So this seed was planted way back when I was at university. I just fell in love with country music, and I always promised myself that I'd do a country album at some point. I kind of joked about it, but I had a box under my bed with bits of The Roads We Traveled in, just like things I had like. I mean, this is when I wasn't writing notes on my iPhone. Like, I just had bits of paper with ideas for songs and stuff like that. And so originally, after Love 24 Hours, I was planning to do The Roads to Travel, but I wanted to record it live. So I wanted to record it, everyone in the room at the same time. But then what happened was COVID happened, so I had to get everybody to send their parts in. But in a way, it turned out nicer. And that's my mum's favorite record. So I'm really fond of the roads we traveled. And it was nice to do something different. And I think Roads We Traveled was very different in terms of like, I'm only going to allow myself to have one guitar track on every album. And by that point, I hadn't recorded an album without electric guitars. So having to use stuff like banjos and mandolins. I remember for Roads, we had this really cool ukulele part. So I had to learn how to play ukulele for that one song. So yeah, it was really really fun. And I think there's something very raw about it. And I think Light Between the Oceans is kind of an extension, but I think it ends up in a totally different place.
The thought that came to my mind was you had one here that's kind of earthy. Now you have the Light Between the Oceans. So we've got the ocean themes, we've got earth, and we've got water. We have space between us. So now all we need is fire of some kind. And we've covered the elements, right?
I'll get started on it tomorrow.
The music is key to your life, but you do identify as neurodiverse, but your music is your passion and it is what you are.
Yeah.
Do you now consider yourself somewhat of an autistic advocate, or just you don't mind discussing it, but the music is still dominant?
I think it's a really difficult line, because the way I like to listen to music, I was talking about this with a friend the other night. The way I like to listen to music is I don't want to know who the person is. So so me and Matthew talk about this all the time. A good song should sound good around a campfire. So it doesn't matter whether something like Seagulls, you could have a metal version of that, you could have an electronic version of that. You could have acoustic, a strings version. The song would still work. And so for me, I'm into songs, not the people behind. But I do realize I'm in a point of my life now where I am recognized to a degree, and therefore I'm an advocate whether I like it or not. And I think sometimes people are given positions and they're very reluctant to recognize that position. But I think we're all put into a position, and I think maybe it's a maturity thing, but I've come to a point where I do have to speak about it now. And I don't feel forced to, but I feel like not speaking about it isn't just because I know there's other people struggling out there a lot more than I am. And I think it's got to a point saying, okay, I'd love someone to listen to the music separately, but I know that's a bit of a big ask, because the music is me. It's an extension of who I am. But I think I'm at the point where, I do, that was what Ignite was, and, making steps with encouraging people to be themselves and to be who they are. So I think I'm definitely more at the point of being an advocate now than ever before. I guess in a way I'm still trying to work out how to do that. And would that be more healthy without music? Would that be more healthy on a one-to-one basis? But I think definitely in my personal life and, with friends and the people around me, I've definitely become a lot more. We need to support people who struggle with this, who are dealing with this.
When I think of knowing about an artist and knowing the music, the track that comes to my mind is Johnny Cash's cover of Hurt.
Yeah, big song.
Because when you know that someone has gone through addiction, depression, and then they're singing about hurting themselves, there's a really strong connection there. A lot of the music, probably most of the music I listen to, I can't tell you anything about the performer's life.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. One of the bands I really liked in the 90s, the Donnas, and I was curious. So I looked up, and it turns out that the drummer who had hurt her shoulder ended up going to law school. And I was thinking of how that rebellious punk rock almost feel going to becoming just another lawyer in some ways to some of it was an interesting twist there to know that history when I looked it up. So I get what you're saying. Sometimes just not knowing is fine. It's rare when the song really speaks to that person's experiences, even if it's, like I said, Johnny Cash, it's a cover that really speaks to who he was in a strange way. Do you feel that any of your songs, though, do speak to who you are as a person and the journey you're on?
I hope all of them do. Obviously, there's particular ones that have been special over the amount of time. I think now From How Are You Really was a really big song, but it's weird. There's songs that you don't even think too much of, and they really make an impact in people's lives. So a really big song of this record is Hold the Line, which was really just basically put my heart and soul on the record like I never had before. But it's even stuff like so the last track of this album is called Oakworth, which is named after a railway station that I really like in Lancashire. And that really spoke to someone. And there isn't a lot on that record lyrically, but one of my friends came up to me and she said that did something in me. And I think that's the beautiful thing about music. Sometimes it does things in people that we ourselves can't explain. But, definitely, I think that should be the goal. I don't think we should just write songs for the sake of writing songs. I think, it's something I carry is I think we have a responsibility as a songwriter to really change people, or to at least move people, at least to grab people in a moment.
I enjoy what you're doing. And where can people find more about both your solo projects and Space Between Us?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is to follow me on Instagram. That's probably like my daily updates on what I'm doing, what I'm recording. So that's just Surj, sh_. But also, obviously, all our music's on major digital platforms and stuff like that. And you can go and listen to it. I'm working on my YouTube channel at the moment. That's a new thing. So I've just started this new series called Song Stories, which is basically the story behind every song. So at the moment, I'm doing, obviously, The Light Between the Oceans, but at some point I might do other. That's had a great success. I've been asked to do it on other songs from other records. So what does this song mean? I'm planning to do it behind the scenes at some point as well, like production stuff on how I made Priority Spring and stuff like that. So there's lots coming. There's lots planned. So just keep us on social media, and we've got some exciting things coming this year.
I will be sure to include all of those links in the show notes. I want to thank Surj for joining Perspectives on Neurodiversity. As you said, Surj is first and foremost a musician and a storyteller. That's how you describe what you're doing. It's a very accurate description of how your albums feel. I really enjoy our time together. Thank you for taking this time out of your day to join the podcast.
No worries. It's been a pleasure, as always.
Again, all of the links will be there. I will link to the music. I will link to the link tree in the Instagram. Again, Surj is based out of London. Would you plan to do any shows in the States in the future once things all settle down?
Yes. I'm planning. I want to do a piano tour at some point. So I just want to do me and piano, which would be great. My thing at the moment is to do more intimate thing. So the show we did last Sunday was actually like a sit down thing, which is really weird. Which is really, really weird. So people clap politely at the end songs, but towards the end, it just became so special. We did it in a church as well. We did it in a church building, and it was so eerie. And like, so the last song I did what did I do? I did Hold the Line literally right at the end of the set, and it was just myself on a piano, and it was really nice. I think I found a sound that I really like. So I'd love to do something like that with just a cello or something like that. So that's my plan. So States would be next year at some point.
I know that it's been a difficult few years, but in some ways we're bouncing back to something close to normal. I wish you all the best. I really do enjoy this. Again, Surj and also Space Between Us. All of those links will be in the podcast notes. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of Perspectives on Neurodiversity. Remember to subscribe to the podcast and please leave a review if you found this show interesting. Thank you so much, Surj.
Thank you so much.